You're tuned into Press TV, coming to you live from our headquarters here in Tehran. A tragic day for Muslims and, of course, human rights advocates around the world. Ayatollah Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, whose main word was establishment of democracy and attaining the rights of all oppressed people of Saudi Arabia, has been executed by the Saudi regime. Nimr, along with 46 other people, were killed by beheading, with 4 of them being shot by firing squad. Sheikh Nimr was arrested in 2012. He was killed on Saturday. And to get more on what the tragic event, we're joined from London by Catherine Shakhdar. She's the director of Shafakna Institute for Middle Eastern Studies, and also from Belfast by Saeb Shaath. He's an author and Middle East affairs expert. Thank you very much for joining us here on Press TV. What do you think about Sheikh Nimr's execution? Catherine, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's a tragedy, and I think that I speak for the entire Muslim community today, saying that his death will be felt across the Islamic world very deeply. It is more than a tragedy, actually. It's through his death, the Saudi regime is literally trying to silence a resistance movement, democracy movement in Saudi Arabia, and beyond that, the Persian Gulf. And I think that today will be remembered maybe as the day, where people around the world will really come to terms with the reality of the Saudi regime, which is a violent reactionary theocracy which has no place anymore in the Middle East and in the world in general.
Let's go to our guest in Belfast. Saeb, what did you think about the execution, the timing of the execution happening today, and what could have been done to prevent this from happening?
I believe, first of all, I want to pass my deepest condolences to his family and to the Arab people and to the Islamic Ummah for losing such a brave man. The timing of this is really where the Saudis can showing their frustration after the success of the Syrian army of taking their man from Aloush, from the picture in Syria. I think that's where the Saudis hurried up to execute and to assassinate and murder Sheikh Nimr. This is the world community. We're watching the Saudis beheading hundreds of people every year, and there is no pressure exerted in the Saudis to stop that criminal behavior. Instead of that, they rewarded them to be maybe the head of the United Nations Human Rights Council. This has become a joke. The Saudis executed Sheikh Nimr, the insulting bit among terrorists. To give the hint to the international community, like Sheikh Nimr, the religious leader who were resisting injustices, targeting his own people, using peaceful means, treated as a terrorist. This is the biggest insult to the Islamic Ummah here. But the Saudis acted, and they know they have immunity from the Western powers who protected them. That's where the pressure have to be exerted, since the Saudis are a puppet at the end of the day to the United States of America and Western powers, and they only execute orders, and the West protect them as long as they are obedient and to the Western orders. And the Saudis, we notice, they spend the fortunes of Arabia in destroying Syria and Yemen, Iraq and Libya, in causing mayhem in the Arabic world, and at that to even in executing Sheikh Nimr, they are trying to escalate a sectarian war. They created the Saudis themselves in Syria and in Iraq, and they're trying to now widen this sectarian strife in the Middle East. Using such a killing. But I think it's the people are aware what the Saudis are trying to do in here, and I hope a lot of intellectuals and scientists and scholars stand to explain what this insinuates to the Arab world.
Well, Catherine, let's go back to you. And we've been seeing an outcry from the Muslim world regarding the Sheikh's execution, Sunnis and Shias alike. We've also been, we've heard like shock expressed by a few officials in the UK and also Europe, but unfortunately no condemnation from US leaders. Do you think there could have been, we could have actually, in the Muslim world, more could have been done to prevent the execution of the Sheikh?
Well, yes, I think more could have been done, but the problem is it's been a political decision. And I think that, as far as, Saudi Arabia goes now, if you're looking at the kind of narrative coming out of Washington and Saudi Arabia today, there was a recent article in the Tower which basically angles Iran as a strategic threat for Saudi Arabia and the US, more dangerous than ISIS itself. And so, you have it right there. I think that, the execution today of Sheikh al-Nimr is essentially a sign. Saudi Arabia knows exactly what it's getting by executing such a holy man. He was one of the most prominent Shia cleric in Saudi Arabia, but around the world, he was an outspoken critic of tyranny, and he was a model of resistance for Sunnis and Shia around the world, and Christian as well. Anyone who thinks resistance and feels oppression, he was a model to follow. And so his death, Saudi Arabia understood very well that by killing him, they would kill, the hope for millions and millions of people. And so a reaction would be expected. And because Sheikh al-Nimr has been linked by Iran, within this narrative that whenever a Shia cleric is speaking the truth, then essentially Tehran is sitting behind him and supporting him, which is of course untrue. Iran has its own policy and does not need to support anyone. People are very capable of speaking their own mind. But in a Saudi and US narrative, they're hoping to get a reaction from the Shia community so that they could turn around and tell the media, look, you have violence coming out of Iran and you have all those, Shia politicians and Shia clerics who are calling for violence and retaliation against the kingdom. And so Washington would have an excuse to come and fly to the help of Saudi Arabia. This is how I think, we need to look at this execution, this murder of Sheikh al-Nimr. And of course, more could have been done. But again, it is a political decision. And I don't think that anyone could have, done more in the sense that condemnation have been done time and time and time again by clerics in Iran, in Iraq, in Lebanon. We had the Islamic Human Rights Commission in London doing, countless lobbies and countless petitions and countless demonstrations in front of the Saudi embassy, and nothing has been done because the international community does not care. Because the UN is controlled by both the Saudi and Washington. Saudi Arabia has billions of dollars to throw at politicians, and they have a very powerful lobby now in Washington. And so you see today the result of this Wahhabi money being spent and this narrative of sectarianism and divisions within the community. Because Sheikh al-Nimr was speaking for both Sunni and Shia. He was speaking for Islam in general. He was speaking for democracy. He was speaking for human rights. And he wasn't making any division in between people. He wanted the Islamic community to be united, because so they should be united. There's only one Islam, and everyone who's advocating for sectarianism is by definition an enemy of Islam. And so of course they killed him because they don't stand for Islam in Riyadh, they stand for Wahhabism, which is the negation of Islam. And Washington is, I'm afraid, I don't think that the Saudi are actually the puppet of Washington. I think it's the other way around now, because money speaks louder today. And Washington might have a very powerful army, but I'm afraid that they have become mercenaries for Al Saud regime. And we see today the result of this regime. And they are acting and enacting the same kind of twisted, judicial decision that ISIS is doing. I mean, how many beheadings will it take for people to actually connect the dots and realize that Riyadh is ISIS?
Well, a great thing that you pointed to, talking about the Western mainstream narrative and it trying to appear like a sectarian division amongst the Sunnis and the Shiites, whilst we already know that 46 others were executed alongside Sheikh Nimr, many of them being Sunnis. How do you think this story is being broadcasted and reflected on, Saeb?
I don't think this story is becoming part of the mainstream storylines in the Western media, and it won't, because as your guest mentioned, the Western countries and the medias as well, they work as PR for the Saudis regime in here. If we notice, even big, massive military complex companies like Boeing and that, they employ a huge amount of PR campaigns to protect Saudi Arabia's image. And in the Arabic world, it's different, since there is some media like Al Mayadeen, Al Manar, and that they expose this truly and put it to the Arabic. But these kind of Arabic outlets, alternative media outlets, are being targeted by the Saudi Arabia and by being pushed out of the Arab satellite system, which is controlled actually by Saudi Arabia. And so the battle Saudi Arabia trying to show to the Arab, or to present to the Arab people, like here they are fighting terrorists who are progressing or implementing what they call it, quote unquote, Iranian agenda, which is Iran is the enemy with Saudi Arabia trying to represent through this media network, not Israel, not the Zionists, not the imperialist occupation of Arabia actually. That is the game. But we noticed since the late King Abdullah, when King Solomon took control of Arabia, and his son, there is shift here became in the politics of Saudi Arabia, and it's an alliance with the radical Islam or radical Wahhabi side of Islam and Muslim Brotherhood. And we noticed the shift happened in Yemen to begin with, when they were supporting openly Hizb al-Islah and the Muslim Brotherhoods in Yemen, and then we witnessed the military campaign targeting Yemen, and the same thing happening now in other sides, with ISIL and in Syria or in Iraq. There is this kind of alliance, which is now the Turkish jumping on this wagon. There is a fanatic Wahhabi agenda and Muslim Brotherhood's alliance, which is King Suleiman is presenting. And I think this executing of Sheikh Nimr and Nimr as well is part of it. But let's focus at one fact. I think this is important to focus on. The eastern provinces is where the wealth lies in Arabia, and the people of the eastern provinces are marginalized and impoverished people, denied of their any even share of their own wealth, which is the basin of the oil of Arabia is there. Those people are pushed out of the system and become the poorest of the poor of Arabia. That's where Sheikh Nimr was standing, and the pro-democracy movement in Saudi Arabia were fighting for their rights and using, of course, peaceful means. And the Saudi regime thought this is endangering their monopoly over wealth and power in Saudi Arabia. Of those people, well, through a peaceful means, can start demanding their rights and their share. And this is the powerful message to anyone who was engaged in the pro-democracy movement. They're going to face the same fate of Sheikh Nimr. They want to try to silence any demand presented to them to share at least those people their own wealth, their own territory in the eastern provinces, and their own oil. They are denied to take any part of it, or to be even included in the Saudi state.
Well, Catherine, what is it? A great point that Saeb actually mentioned, the sincerity of all these countries in the West claiming to be fighting ISIL and trying to promote democracy and freedom of rights. 47 people being beheaded by the Saudi government or executed violently. We don't know if all of them were beheaded or not. So they were executed violently in one day. That's the start of 2016. And no word of condemnation. While if ISIL does the same thing, they're disgusted, they're outraged, and it's evil.
Well, it's political double standard, at its best. But again, when you think that Saudi Arabia is actually, heading the UN Human Rights Council, then you understand, the kind of dystopian world we live in today. Whatever Saudi Arabia does it's absolutely fine. When ISIL does the very same thing and is actually rooting its ideology in Wahhabism, which is, the official religion of Riyadh, then everything goes wrong. But the only reason why Washington has a problem with ISIS is nothing to do with its ideology or even its methods. I think it's just because it's an excuse, for military interventionism and to justify, a form of covert imperialism in the Middle East where there's a lot of natural resources to be had. And I think that your guest makes a very good point when he speaks about Qatif and the kind of all riches which lie within Qatif. And of course, Qatif is home to the Shia Muslim community of Saudi Arabia. And so essentially all the oil resources are within the hands of the Shia community. And that is very true for the rest of the region, actually. I mean, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Iraq as well. And, there is a great fear. I mean, Saudi Arabia only understands sectarianism. They cannot understand nationalism. They do not understand, such terms as social justice or democracy or even equality, within their territory. And so they act and view the world, within their own very myopic understanding and thwarted vision of the world. And so they react, and the only thing that they do understand is bloodshed and violence. And looking at ISIL and what it does, you have Riyadh right there exactly. You have the type of policy that Saudi Arabia has implemented for decades onto their people, if not centuries. And the world is slowly discovering what living under terror is, because living in Saudi Arabia is essentially living under terror. And Western capitals have remained silent because they receive money from Saudi Arabia to stay silent. They are quite happy to have the Saudis support their military endeavors in the Middle East. They're quite happy to be able to get a piece of the pie in the Middle East and have powerful regional allies such as, the UAE, for example, or Qatar or the Saudis. And Saudi Arabia has an empire today. I mean, they control Turkey, they control the Gulf region, they control many capitals in the Middle East and in the Islamic world in general. And so today, when they see people like Sheikh al-Nimr rising, a pillar for democracy, speaking the truth and empowering his people beyond sectarianism, because we need to understand that this cleric was absolutely peaceful. He never once advocated for violence. He never once carried weapons. And he always called for peace. He always called for resistance, but peaceful resistance. And there's great power in peaceful resistance. If I recall, Iran managed to defeat the Shah through peaceful resistance. And I think that the Saudi are very, very scared that the same thing could happen in the kingdom, that people will rise and will stand against oppression no matter the cost, because sometimes, even if it's difficult and even if, victory is almost impossible, people will still stand, because, doing otherwise would mean that they are reneging on their own faith and belief, and that they cannot do. And I'm afraid that Riyadh is very scared of Shia Islam, because Shia Islam was born in resistance and is actually the very definition of resistance, peaceful resistance, by the way. And I think that they're very afraid of the spirit of Shia Islam and how it has empowered countries across the world. I mean, you look at Yemen, you look at Lebanon, you look at Bahrain, and there you have peaceful resistance. You have people, protecting their land, protecting their families, and defending their rights, because their rights are theirs and they are God-given and they cannot be taken away.
Well, Saeb, you already expressed your disgust at the Saudis being appointed as the head of the UN Human Rights Council. A lot of nasty events going on in Saudi Arabia. We have this Hajj stampede. We know the Saudis are involved in an unlawful war in Yemen. 7,400 people have been killed so far, and the executions in the Saudi kingdom itself have increased since King Salman acceded to the throne in January 2015. How are the events that are happening in Saudi Arabia going to actually backlash on the Saudis themselves?
The Saudis people are suffering from these kind of practices. The people in there are really oppressed. Even the expats who's in Saudi Arabia, Arabs or non-Arabs, are suffering. I'll give you an example of Palestinian poet who is rotten in jail there, and the Saudis going to execute him as well because of a poem. Because in his poem, he showed his disgust of this monopoly of power of Al Saud over all diversion of of life in the kingdom. So any voice of dissent in Saudi Arabia, in a poem, in a short story, in a novel, in an article, or a verbal there, that is their fate. Their fate is for jail or to be executed. And I don't know when the West gonna be honest, at least when they talk about they are like the United States of America, the leader of the free world. What free world when their puppets is executing their own people for just refusal to adhere to this backward, reactionary, feudalist ways of life, which is the Saudis. So the Saudis and the Western imperialist forces, who's allied themselves with the Saudis, are responsible for the crimes the Saudis doing in Saudi Arabia or in the region, and they provide them with the cover up for all the crimes the Saudis doing within Arabia or in Bahrain or in Yemen or in Libya or in Iraq or in Syria. So they are partners, and I want to reiterate this again. The Saudis execute the agenda of these Western powers. So I don't think Saudi Arabia would have executed Sheikh Nimr or anyone of the United States of America. They said to them, don't do that. I don't believe for 1 second the Saudis would say no to the United States of America or even Britain if they demanded that of them, because they are the protectors of the Saudis regime alongside Israel in there. And Saudi Arabia, if you want to go back in time a little bit, it was created during the mandate on Palestine. It's to be the eastern side, to protect the existence of Zionism, the entity of Israel. And there is the handwritten by Al Saud, Abdulaziz Al Saud himself, about his obeying and supporting the British plan for creating Israel. So they are part of the same plan. The Saudis knows existence of Israel, and Israel is strong in there. It means the survivor of Al Saud regime, the shaking of Israel or anybody.
Saeb, we'll have to leave it there. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. I'm going to thank my guests in London, Catherine Shakdam, Director of the Shafakna Institute for Middle Eastern Studies. Also from Belfast, Saeb Shaath, author and Middle East affairs expert. Thank you very much both for joining us here on Press TV, and thank you for watching. We're covering the unfortunate execution of Ayatollah Sheikh Nimr Nimr's execution by the Saudi regime. And now back to our normal programs. I'll be back in 4 minutes' time, less than 4 minutes' time, with the top stories here on Press TV. Stay tuned.